I'm Alina Vance, 34, and I used my forensic accounting degree to build the financial empire my husband now claims as his own. I sat in the corner of the glass-walled executive suite, my body rigid against the cold leather of the chair. My hands were folded neatly in my lap, but beneath the polished mahogany table, my thumbs were digging into my palms so hard I could feel the skin beginning to break. The air in the room was so thick with tension I felt like I was choking on it. Julian was standing over the desk, his face a shade of crimson that usually preceded a disaster. Maya stood on the other side. She was 23 years old. She was brilliant, eager, and terrified. "It was a simple request," Julian hissed, his voice trembling with a rage that felt disproportionate to the situation. "I just needed the quarterly projections on my desk by 9. Maya's lip quivered. "Mr. Vance, I sent them to your email at 8:30, she whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the air conditioning. "I printed a copy, but you lost it," Julian cut her off, his volume rising. I looked down at my laptop screen. The projections were right there in the shared drive. I knew exactly where they were. I could have spoken up. I could have said, "Julian, calm down, the file is digital." But I stayed silent. I was paralyzed by a fear that had been growing in me for years, a slow-acting poison that had turned my assertive personality into this ghost of a woman. "I didn't lose it," Maya stammered. "Don't lie to me," Julian screamed. The sound tore through the office like a physical blow. He grabbed the heavy crystal paperweight from his desk. It was a globe I had bought him for our second anniversary, back when I thought his ambition was a shared dream and not a pathology. He didn't aim at her, but the violence of the motion made me flinch. He hurled the heavy glass against the door frame. It shattered on impact. The sound was deafening, a sharp crack that echoed in the hollows of my chest. Shards of crystal rained down onto the plush gray carpet like 1,000 jagged diamonds. Maya gasped, covering her mouth with both hands, tears instantly spilling over her lashes. The office outside the glass walls had gone dead silent. I could see the heads of other employees turned toward us, their eyes wide with panic. Julian didn't care who was watching. He thrived on the audience. He leaned across the desk, his knuckles white as he braced himself. "You are a parasite," he spat, the words dripping with venom. "You waste my time, you waste my oxygen." I felt bile rise in my throat. "Get out," he said, his voice dropping to a terrifyingly low register. "Pack your things, and don't bother applying anywhere else in this city." Maya stood frozen. "I said get out," he roared. "I will personally ensure you never earn a cent in this industry again. I will bury you, do you understand me?" He pointed a shaking finger at the door. Maya turned and ran. Julian slammed the heavy glass door behind her so hard the walls shook. I felt the vibration of the slam in my teeth. He turned his back to me, adjusting his cufflinks as if he hadn't just traumatized a young woman over a file that wasn't even missing. I stared through the glass wall. I watched Maya walk to her cubicle. She was shaking so badly she dropped a picture frame into her box. She packed a single cardboard box, a stapler, a mug, a small succulent plant. She wiped her eyes aggressively, trying to maintain some shred of dignity, but I could see her shoulders heaving. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I looked at Julian, the man who wore the suits I bought him and spent the money I earned him. I looked at the shattered glass on the floor, and for the first time in a decade, the fear in my stomach shifted into something else. It felt cold. It felt calculated. It felt like accounting. I'm Alina Vance, 34, and I used my forensic accounting degree to build the financial empire my husband now claims as his own. I pushed back my chair, the leather scraping loudly against the floor. I didn't look at Julian. I didn't look at the shattered crystal on the carpet. I walked out of the glass office, my heels clicking a sharp, staccato rhythm that sounded like gunshots in the silent bullpen. Every head was bowed. No one dared to make eye contact with me. They knew I was the co-founder, but they also knew I had become the silent partner in my own marriage. I pressed the button for the elevator and watched the numbers descend with agonizing slowness. My reflection in the polished steel doors looked pale. My lipstick was perfect, but my eyes looked like they belonged to a stranger. When the doors slid open, I stepped into the lobby and didn't stop until I pushed through the heavy revolving doors and out into the crushing humidity of mid-July. The heat hit me like a physical slap. It was 95 degrees and the air smelled of melting tar and exhaust fumes. I scanned the parking lot, squinting against the glare of the sun bouncing off the rows of luxury sedans. I saw her. Maya was walking toward the far end of the lot, where the interns and junior staff were forced to park. She was struggling with her box, the weight of it awkward in her shaking arms. I started walking. I didn't run. I moved with a precision I hadn't felt in years. I watched as she reached her car, a battered silver hatchback that had seen better days. She tried to shift the box to one hip to dig for her keys. Her hands were trembling so violently that she lost her grip on her purse. I heard the sound of metal hitting asphalt. It was a sharp, pathetic clatter that seemed to echo in the heavy air. She dropped to her knees, scrambling to pick them up, her hair falling across her face in a curtain of shame. That was when I heard it. "Pathetic, isn't it?" The voice boomed from above. I froze. I looked up, shielding my eyes with my hand. Julian was standing on the executive balcony on the fourth floor. He was leaning over the railing, a tumbler of scotch in his hand, flanked by his two favorite VPs, men who laughed at his jokes even when they weren't funny. They were watching Maya. They were watching her crawl on the pavement like it was a spectator sport. "Crush the help before lunch," Julian laughed, the sound carrying down to us on the wind. "That's how you keep the ecosystem clean, boys." The men roared with laughter, clinking their glasses against Julian's. Something inside my chest snapped. It wasn't a sad snap. It was the sound of a cable breaking under too much tension, releasing a kinetic energy that had been stored for a decade. My throat tightened. I tasted copper on my tongue, a familiar, burning rage that I had swallowed for the sake of peace, for the sake of the business, for the sake of a love that didn't exist anymore. I looked at Julian one last time. He didn't see me. He was too busy celebrating his own cruelty. I looked back at Maya. She wasn't just an employee. She was me. She was the Alina of 10 years ago, full of fire and potential before I let a narcissist grind me down into fine powder. If I let her drive away, she would think she was worthless. If I let her drive away, Julian won. I walked faster. My heels sank slightly into the softening asphalt. I reached the hatchback just as Maya grabbed her keys. She flinched when she saw my shadow fall over her. She looked up, her eyes red and swollen, terror written into every line of her face. "Mrs. Vance," she choked out, scrambling to stand up. "I'm leaving, I swear, I just—" "Stop," I said. My voice was steady. It was the voice I used to use in boardrooms before Julian silenced me. I reached out. I placed my hand firmly on her shoulder. Through the thin fabric of her blouse, I could feel the frantic heat of her skin. I could feel the vibrations of her sobbing. She froze under my touch, waiting for the final blow. I squeezed her shoulder hard enough to ground her, hard enough to stop the shaking. "Open the trunk, Maya," I said softly. She blinked, confused. "Why?" she whispered. I looked up at the balcony one last time, where my husband was still laughing at the destruction of a human being. I looked back at her. Because we have work to do, I said, and we aren't doing it here. I'm Alina Vance, 34, and I used my forensic accounting degree to build the financial empire my husband now claims as his own. The air inside the roadside diner smelled like burnt bacon grease and 30 years of desperation. I sat in the booth furthest from the door. My back was against the peeling vinyl wall. I checked the entrance for the fourth time in 2 minutes. Paranoia pricked at the back of my neck like a hot needle. I had never done anything illicit in my life. I was the woman who balanced the books to the penny. I was the woman who followed the rules while Julian broke them. But today, sitting under the buzzing fluorescent lights of Sal's Route 9 stop, I felt like a criminal, and I liked it. The bell above the door jingled. I watched Maya step inside. She looked worse than she had in the parking lot. Her eyes were red-rimmed and puffy. Her mascara had dried in jagged streaks down her cheeks. She was clutching her purse to her chest like a shield. She scanned the room, her gaze darting frantically from face to face. She saw me. She hesitated. I gave a single, sharp nod. She walked toward me, her legs looking unsteady. She slid into the booth opposite me. The red vinyl squeaked loudly under her weight. She didn't speak. She just looked at me with the terrified expression of a cornered animal waiting for the final strike. "Mrs. Vance," she whispered, her voice cracking. I don't understand." I didn't waste time with pleasantries. I didn't offer her a menu. I reached into my structured leather tote bag. My fingers brushed against the cold steel of my laptop before finding the thick paper texture I was looking for. I pulled out the manila envelope. It was heavy. It was unmarked. I slid it across the sticky laminate table. It made a dry, rasping sound as it moved over the syrup stains. It stopped right in front of her trembling hands. "Open it," I said. My voice was low. It was barely louder than the hum of the refrigerator unit behind the counter. Maya looked at the envelope, then at me. She reached out slowly. Her fingers shook as she lifted the metal clasp. She peeked inside. Her breath hitched in her throat. Her eyes went wide, the whites showing all around her irises. She slumped back against the booth, all the color draining from her face. "Mrs. Vance," she gasped. There's so much." $50,000, I said flatly. I watched the realization hit her. "It's cash," I continued, "untraceable." She looked down at the stacks of bills, then back up at me with confusion clouding her fear. Is this hush money?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Did he send you to pay me off?" I let out a short, bitter laugh. "Julian doesn't know I'm here," I said. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the sticky table. "Julian thinks you're driving home to your parents' house to cry," I said. "He thinks he broke you." I pointed at the envelope. "That money was sitting in a safe in our bedroom," I told her. "It was meant for a renovation project. Julian wanted Italian marble in the master bathroom." I felt a cold smile tug at the corner of my mouth. I decided I had a better use for it. Maya stared at me. "I don't understand," she repeated. "You aren't fired, Maya," I said, my voice hardening into steel. "You're just under new management." I saw a spark ignite in her eyes. It was faint, but it was there. "You found something in the quarterly projections," I said. "That's why he panicked. That's why he staged that tantrum to get you out of the building." Maya nodded slowly. "The shell companies," she whispered. "The revenue streams didn't match the tax filings. There were millions of dollars moving through accounts that shouldn't exist." My heart hammered against my ribs. I knew it. I had suspected it for months, but Julian had locked me out of the main servers. He thought he was clever. He thought he was untouchable. "He erased your access," I said. "He wiped your credentials before you even left the parking lot." I reached into my bag again. My pulse thrummed in my fingertips. I pulled out a small, black object. I slid it across the table until it rested on top of the money, a burner phone. It was a cheap plastic flip phone that I had bought at a gas station 3 towns over with cash. Take it, I commanded. Maya looked at the phone as if it were a grenade. We are going to finish the work you started, I said, but we aren't going to do it from the office. I looked her dead in the eye. I can get the raw data, I said. I have physical access to his home office. I have his passwords memorized from before he changed them. I leaned closer. But I need you to process it. I need you to build the paper trail that puts him in prison. Maya picked up the phone. She held it tightly in her hand. Her trembling had stopped. The fear in her face was being replaced by something else. Focus, determination. Why? She asked softly. He's your husband. I looked out the window at the gray highway. I thought about the shattered crystal on the floor. I thought about the 10 years of my life I had poured into a man who viewed me as an asset to be liquidated. I looked back at her. Because he made a mistake, I said. He thought we were weak. I stood up. I smoothed down my pencil skirt. Wait for my call, I said. Use that phone only. Tell no one. I turned to leave. Mrs. Vance, she called out. I paused. I'm not Mrs. Vance anymore, I said, the realization settling over me like a suit of armor. Not in here. I walked out of the diner and into the blinding sun. We were ghosts in the machine now, and the haunting had just begun. I'm Alina Vance, 34, and I used my forensic accounting degree to build the financial empire my husband now claims as his own. The house was dead silent, but my ears were ringing. It was 3:14 a.m. The only light in the sprawling living room came from the 13-inch screen of my laptop. It cast a ghostly blue pallor over my hands. My fingers flew across the keyboard. I wasn't looking at recipes. I wasn't shopping for the charity gala dresses Julian insisted I wear. I was staring at a secure, encrypted chat window that dissolved its history every 60 seconds. I found the discrepancy in the vendor list for Q3, the message read. It was from Maya. 6 months ago, she couldn't tell a shell company from a legitimate LLC. Now she was tracing money trails better than half the senior partners at the firm. I felt a surge of fierce maternal pride. I typed back instantly. Don't look at the vendor names. Look at the routing numbers. Cross-reference them with the Cayman account I flagged last week. I waited. The cursor blinked. It was the heartbeat of our operation. For half a year this had been my life. By day I was the trophy wife. I smiled at luncheons. I nodded when Julian bragged about record profits. I played the part of the decorative object he believed me to be. But by night, while the scotch dragged him into a heavy, snoring sleep, I came down here. I became the architect of his downfall. A floorboard creaked above me. My heart slammed against my ribs so hard I thought it might crack the bone. I didn't panic. Panic was a luxury I couldn't afford. My fingers executed the shortcut I had practiced 1,000 times. Command-Tab, the encrypted spreadsheet vanished. In its place, a Pinterest board for Tuscan villa renovations filled the screen. I lowered the brightness. I slowed my breathing. I heard the heavy, uneven thud of footsteps on the stairs. Julian. I didn't turn around. I kept my eyes glued to a picture of rustic Italian tile, forcing my shoulders to drop, forcing the tension out of my neck. He entered the room. The smell hit me before he did, a waft of stale Glenfiddich and sweat. He didn't say anything at first. He just stood there, swaying slightly in the doorway, a dark shape in the periphery of my vision. Alina, he grunted. His voice was thick with sleep and alcohol. I turned slowly. I put on the mask. I softened my eyes. I gave him the sleepy, submissive smile he expected. I couldn't sleep, honey, I whispered, just looking at tiles for the guest bath. He shambled closer. He was wearing his silk robe, the one I bought him for our 5th anniversary. He looked down at me. For a second, his eyes narrowed. I felt a cold bead of sweat roll down my spine. Did he know? Could he smell the deceit on me? He reached out. His hand was heavy and hot as it landed on my shoulder. My skin crawled. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to recoil, to slap his hand away, to run. I stayed frozen. I leaned into his touch just enough to sell the lie. You work too hard on this house, he slurred. You should be resting. You have to look good for the investors tomorrow. I know, I said. I just want everything to be perfect for you. He smirked. It was that same arrogant tilt of the lips that he wore when he fired Maya. That's my girl, he said. He leaned down. He kissed the top of my head. His lips were wet. I stopped breathing. I felt like I was holding a live grenade with the pin pulled out. If I flinched, if I showed even a flicker of the hatred burning in my gut, everything would explode. He straightened up, satisfied with his possession. Come to bed soon, he muttered. He turned and shuffled toward the kitchen for a glass of water. I waited until I heard the refrigerator door seal shut. I waited until I heard his footsteps recede back up the stairs. I waited until the bedroom door clicked overhead. Only then did I exhale. The air rushed out of my lungs in a shaky gasp. I wiped my palms on my silk pajama pants. They were slick with sweat. I turned back to the laptop. Command tab, the Pinterest board disappeared. The black screen with the green text returned. A new message was waiting. I found it. The routing numbers match. He moved $4.2 million on the day he fired me. I stared at the screen. My hands stopped shaking. Cold, deadly calm settled over me. $4.2 million. That was a federal offense. That was wire fraud. That was embezzlement. That was 10 to 15 years in a minimum security prison. I began to type. Download the ledger, encrypt it with the key I gave you. Do not save it to your local drive. I paused. I looked up at the ceiling toward the bedroom where my husband was sleeping peacefully, thinking he was the king of the world. I looked back at the screen. Maya, I typed. Yes. Get some sleep. Tomorrow we stop tracing. I hit enter. The cursor blinked back at me. What do we do tomorrow? She asked. I allowed myself a small, terrifying smile in the darkness of the living room. Tomorrow, I typed, we start leaking. I closed the laptop. The room plunged into total darkness. I wasn't afraid of the dark anymore. I was the one turning out the lights. I'm Alina Vance, 34, and tonight I am wearing a $4,000 dress to celebrate the man I am about to destroy. The dining room smelled of roasted duck and arrogance. 12 people sat around the mahogany table. They were the city's elite. Bankers, investors, sharks in bespoke Italian suits, and at the head of the table sat the king. Julian held his glass of Highland Park aloft. The amber liquid caught the light of the crystal chandelier. It was 30 years old. It cost more than a Honda Civic. He swirled it carelessly, spilling a drop onto the white linen tablecloth. I watched the stain spread like a fresh wound. To the merger, Julian bellowed. His face was flushed a deep, unhealthy red. His eyes were glassy and wet. To the biggest deal this city has seen in a decade. The table erupted in polite, sycophantic applause. I clapped too. My hands felt numb. I forced the corners of my mouth up. I showed my teeth. I played the part of the doting, decorative wife. And to think, Julian sneered, remaining standing as the applause died down. To think some people said we weren't ready. He looked around the room, inviting them into his joke. I had this little auditor, he said, chuckling. My stomach twisted into a knot. I knew what was coming. Maya, he said, spitting the name out like a piece of gristle. Little Maya, mousy thing, glasses too big for her face. The men at the table chuckled. They didn't know Maya. They didn't know she was smarter than every single one of them combined. She tried to tell me the projections were off, Julian slurred. Can you imagine a junior accountant lecturing me on leverage? He took a heavy swig of the scotch. So I fired her, he announced proudly. I threw her out on the street, taught her a lesson about hierarchy. A man to my left, a hedge fund manager with cold, reptilian eyes, leaned in. Ruthless Julian, he said admiringly. That's why you win. Exactly, Julian said, slamming his hand on the table. You cut the dead weight, you silence the noise. I felt the bile rise in my throat. It burned like acid at the back of my tongue. I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab the carving knife resting on the silver platter and drive it into the table. I wanted to tell them that the dead weight was currently dissecting his entire financial existence from a Motel 6. But I didn't. I stood up gracefully. I smoothed the silk of my dress. I picked up the heavy crystal decanter. More scotch, darling? I asked. My voice was smooth. It was the voice of a woman who knew her place. Julian looked at me. For a second, the cruelty in his eyes softened into possessive pride. Look at her, he said to the room. Perfect, isn't she? I poured the amber liquid into his glass. I watched it rise to the rim. Drink up, I thought. Choke on it. I sat back down. Under the table, my phone vibrated. Once. Short, sharp. My heart skipped a beat. It was the burner. I had risked bringing it to the table, hidden inside the clutch resting on my lap. I looked around. No one was watching me. They were all watching Julian. They were mesmerized by his power, by his money. I slipped my hand under the napkin. I cracked the clutch open just an inch. The screen glowed faintly in the shadow of the table. One new message. From M. My breath caught in my throat. I read the words. The shell companies are linked. I found the master key in the metadata. It connects the Cayman accounts directly to his personal holdings. The world seemed to stop spinning. The noise of the dinner party faded into a dull roar. It wasn't just embezzlement. It wasn't just fraud. It was direct theft. He wasn't just cooking the books. He was stealing from the very investors sitting at this table eating his food. I looked up. Julian was laughing at his own joke. He threw his head back, exposing his throat. He looked so large, so invincible. But he wasn't. He was already dead. He just didn't know it yet. I slid the phone back into the clutch. I snapped it shut. I took a slow, deep breath of the expensive lavender candle smoke drifting from the centerpiece. It mixed with the scotch and the meat. It smelled like victory. I looked at my husband. I really looked at him. I saw the sweat on his brow. I saw the slight tremor in his hand. He was celebrating his ascent. He had no idea he was standing on a trapdoor, and I was the one holding the. I picked up my own glass of water. I raised it in a silent toast to the woman he called a mouse. To the merger, I whispered. I took a sip. The water was cold and clean. I smiled at my husband. It was the most genuine smile I had given him in years. Are you happy, Alina? Julian boomed, catching my eye. Ecstatic, darling, I said. I've never been happier. And for the first time in a decade, I wasn't lying. I'm Alina Vance, 34, and today I am handing the executioner the axe to behead my husband's empire. The sky outside the floor-to-ceiling windows was the color of a bruised plum. It was ugly. It was heavy. It looked exactly how my stomach felt. I sat on the edge of the California king bed and watched Julian. He was manic. He was moving around the dressing room with a frenetic, terrifying energy. He pulled a silk tie from the rack. It was crimson, power red. He wrapped it around his neck, his hands moving in a blur of practiced motion. He looked at himself in the mirror. He bared his teeth. He wasn't checking for spinach. He was checking for weakness. He found none. Today is the day, Alina, he said. His voice was too loud for 6:00 a.m. It bounced off the marble floors. The merger goes through at noon, he continued, tightening the knot until it looked like it might cut off his circulation. By 1201, I'll be the chairman of the largest conglomerate on the West Coast. He turned to me. His eyes were wild, dilated with adrenaline and greed. And you, he said, walking over. I forced myself not to flinch. I forced my lungs to keep expanding, even though the air suddenly felt too thin. He reached out and touched my cheek. His fingers were cold. You look beautiful, he said. You're the perfect accessory for a billionaire. The words landed like a slap. Accessory, not a partner. Not a wife, a thing, something to be worn on his arm like a Rolex or a pair of cufflinks. I smiled. It was a porcelain smile, hard and fragile. I'm just so proud of you, Julian, I lied. My voice didn't shake. I was getting too good at this. I know, he said, turning back to the mirror to admire his reflection one last time. I'm proud of me too. He grabbed his jacket. He checked his pockets. Phone, wallet, keys to the Aston Martin. He didn't check for his soul, he'd left that behind years ago. I'll see you at the celebration dinner, he said. He didn't wait for a response. He marched out of the bedroom like a general going to war. I listened. I heard his heavy footsteps on the stairs. I heard the front door open. I heard the heavy thud of it closing. I waited 5 seconds. I heard the garage door rumble open. I heard the engine of his car roar to life, an aggressive, guttural sound that shook the floorboards beneath my bare feet. I waited until the sound faded down the driveway. I waited until the silence of the house came rushing back in to fill the void he left. Then I moved. I didn't run. Running was for people who were panicked. I wasn't panicked. I was surgical. I stood up and walked to the window. I watched the silver car disappear around the bend of the private road. I looked down at my hand. My wedding ring glinted in the dull morning light. It was 5 carats of flawless diamond. It felt heavy. It felt like a shackle made of ice. I twisted it on my finger. I turned away from the window and walked into his home office. It smelled like cigars and old leather. It was his sanctuary. I sat in his chair. It was too big for me. It was designed to make anyone else feel small. I opened the bottom drawer of his desk. I reached under the false bottom I had discovered 3 months ago while looking for a stamp. My fingers brushed against the cool metal of the flash drive. I pulled it out. This was it. This was the kill switch. I pulled my burner phone from the pocket of my silk robe. I powered it on. The screen lit up, casting a blue glow on my face. I opened the encrypted messaging app. My thumb hovered over Maya's contact. My heart began to hammer against my ribs. It was a violent, erratic rhythm. Thump, thump. Thump, thump. If I did this, there was no going back. If I sent this, I was burning my own life to the ground. I would lose the house. I would lose the cars. I would lose the status. I looked around the room at the expensive art, the mahogany shelves, the awards on the wall. I realized I didn't care. I would rather live in a cardboard box than spend one more day as an accessory. I plugged the drive into my personal laptop, the one he never checked because he thought I only used it for shopping. I mounted the drive. I located the file. Server root access v4 key. This was the key to the private server where he kept the real books. The books that showed the bribes. The books that showed the laundering. The books that proved he had framed Maya for his own crimes. I dragged the file into the chat window. The file size was small, 4 KB, such a tiny thing to destroy such a big man. I typed a message. He just left. Here are the keys to the castle. Burn it down. I hit send. I watched the progress circle spin. It spun once, twice, delivered. I let out a breath I felt like I had been holding for 6 years. My hand started to shake, not from fear, from adrenaline. The phone buzzed in my hand, a reply. Received. The upload starts in 10 minutes. By the time he signs the merger papers, the SEC will already have the notification. I stared at the words. The air in the room suddenly felt electric. It crackled with static. The trap was set. I closed the laptop. I put the flash drive back in the hidden compartment. I stood up and walked out of his office. I walked to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water. My throat was dry. I took a sip. I looked out at the bruised plum sky. The storm was coming, and Julian had forgot his umbrella. I'm Alina Vance, 34, and tonight I am watching my husband's executioner walk through the front door. The air in the Hotel Bristol ballroom was thin. It smelled of expensive perfume, old money, and even more expensive desperation. I stood by the champagne fountain. The golden liquid cascaded down the crystal tiers in a mesmerizing waterfall. I felt the bubbles popping like tiny explosions against my skin. It felt like the static electricity in the air before a violent thunderstorm. The grand ballroom was a sea of black ties and diamond necklaces that caught the light like cold, distant stars. Everyone who was anyone was here. Senators, tech moguls, the people Julian had spent his entire pathetic life trying to impress. I smoothed the fabric of my emerald green gown. My palms were sweating against the silk. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. Thump, 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 thump. I looked across the room. Julian was standing near the orchestra. He was holding a glass of scotch. He was laughing. His head was thrown back, his teeth gleaming under the massive crystal chandeliers. He looked victorious. He looked untouchable. He had signed the merger papers at noon. He thought he had won. He didn't know the ink on those papers was his death warrant. He didn't know the files were already in the hands of the SEC. He didn't know I was the one who sent them. I took a sip of champagne. It tasted like battery acid. I checked my watch. 8:00 p.m. Right on time. The massive double doors at the far end of the room swung open. They hit the walls with a heavy wooden thud that echoed over the polite chatter. The sound was aggressive. It was an interruption. The string quartet seemed to falter. The cellist missed a beat. A hush rippled through the room, starting at the doors and washing over the crowd like a cold wave. Heads turned, conversations died. Julian turned around, annoyed at the distraction. Then I saw it. I saw the color drain from his face. It happened in an instant. He went from flushed arrogance to a ghostly pallor in a single heartbeat. Maya walked in. She wasn't wearing a gown. She wasn't trying to blend in. She was wearing a white power suit that was tailored to absolute perfection. It was sharp. It was structured. It was blindingly bright against the sea of black tuxedos. It cost more than Julian's car. She looked like a blade cutting through the dark fabric of the room. She wasn't the broken girl from the parking lot anymore. She wasn't the crying assistant carrying a box of personal belongings while security escorted her out 3 years ago. She was the predator now. Her hair was slicked back. Her makeup was fierce. She walked with a terrifying, rhythmic confidence. Every step she took on the marble floor clicked with authority. Click, click, click. The crowd parted for her. They didn't know who she was, but they knew power when they saw it. They instinctively moved out of her way like she was royalty. She didn't look at the guests. She didn't look at the waiters. She didn't even look at Julian yet. She looked directly at me. Our eyes locked across the crowded room. The world narrowed down to just the two of us. I saw the fire in her eyes. I saw the cold, calculated rage. She gave me the slightest nod. It was imperceptible to anyone else, but to me it was a scream. It's done. I felt a shiver run down my spine. It wasn't fear, it was exhilaration. I looked back at Julian. His hand was shaking violently. The scotch was sloshing over the rim of his glass, staining his fingers and his cuff. He started to walk toward her. He looked like a man walking toward a firing squad. Maya, he choked out. His voice was weak. It was the voice of a man who realized the trapdoor had just opened beneath his feet. Maya stopped in the center of the room. She smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a wolf that had finally cornered the sheep. Good evening, Julian, she said, her voice carried clearly through the silent room. I believe you're sitting in my chair. Behind her, 4 men in navy blue windbreakers walked through the doors. On the back of their jackets, 3 yellow letters were printed in bold. FBI. I took another sip of champagne. The bubbles didn't feel like explosions anymore. They felt like applause. I watched my husband drop his glass. It shattered on the floor, and I didn't even blink. I'm Alina Vance, 34, and I am currently standing in a ballroom watching my husband's entire reality crumble into dust. I watched the shock on Julian's face curdle into something else. It became ugly. It became familiar. It was the look he gave me when dinner wasn't ready on time. It was the look he gave the valet when the car took 2 minutes too long. It was pure, unadulterated contempt. He didn't see a threat anymore, he saw a nuisance. He saw a stain on his perfect evening. He recovered his composure with a terrifying speed. He straightened his spine. He adjusted his cufflinks. He set his jaw. I knew exactly what he was thinking. He thought she was crashing. He thought she was a desperate, bitter ex-employee here to make a scene. He thought he could crush her like a bug. I took a step closer. I had to be close enough to hear it. I had to witness the collision. My heart was beating in my throat, a frantic, fluttering bird. Thump, thump, thump. I gripped the stem of my champagne flute so hard I thought the crystal might snap. Julian marched toward her. He didn't walk. He stomped. He closed the distance between them in 3 long, aggressive strides. He invaded her personal space. He loomed over her. He used his height as a weapon, just like he always did with me. What the hell do you think you're doing? He hissed. His voice was low. It was venomous. It was meant only for her. Maya didn't flinch. She didn't take a step back. She didn't blink. She just looked up at him with eyes made of absolute zero. Enjoying the party, Julian, she said. Her voice was calm. It was smooth. It was the voice of someone who held all the cards. Julian let out a sharp, incredulous laugh. It was a bark of derision. You don't belong here, he spat. Look at you. You think a rented suit makes you one of us? I felt a flash of heat rise up my neck. He was so arrogant. He was so blind. He raised his hand and snapped his fingers at the head of security standing near the wall. The gesture was dismissive. It was the gesture of a king commanding a servant to take out the trash. Get her out of here, Julian commanded, his voice rising now, drawing eyes. She's trespassing. I want her thrown out on the street where she belongs. The security guard took a step forward. My breath hitched. I felt a spike of panic. Had we miscalculated? Then Maya moved. She didn't attack. She simply raised her right hand, palm out. Stop. The security guard froze. He didn't freeze because of her hand. He froze because of who was walking up behind her. It was Arthur Sterling. The lead investor, the man with the billions. The man Julian had been groveling to for 6 months to close this merger. Arthur wasn't looking at Julian, he was looking at Maya, and he was smiling. Julian's sneer faltered. Arthur, Julian said, his voice taking on that oily, desperate tone he used with powerful men. I apologize, we have a situation. A disgruntled former employee is trying to. Arthur Sterling didn't even glance at Julian. He stepped right past my husband. He extended his hand to Maya. Maya, Arthur said warmly, I was worried the traffic would keep you. The room seemed to tilt on its axis. I saw Julian's brain trying to process the data. It wasn't computing, it was a glitch in his matrix. Maya took Arthur's hand, her grip was firm. I wouldn't miss this, Arthur, she said. We have a lot to celebrate. Julian looked between them. His mouth opened and closed like a fish on a dock. You know her? Julian stammered. Arthur finally turned to look at Julian. His expression was pitying. It was the look you give a child who doesn't understand the joke. Know her? Arthur asked. Julian, this is Maya Lin. I know her name, Julian snapped, his temper fraying. I fired her. Then you made a very expensive mistake, Arthur said quietly. The noise of the party seemed to fade away. I could only hear the blood rushing in my ears. Arthur placed a hand on Maya's shoulder. Maya isn't just a guest, Julian. She is the lead consultant for the Apollo Group. Apollo Group, the venture capital firm, the firm that was buying Julian's company, the firm that was signing his paycheck. And Arthur continued, delivering the final blow with surgical precision. She is the majority stakeholder in this acquisition. The silence that followed was deafening. I watched the color drain from Julian's face. It didn't just fade, it vanished. His skin turned the color of wet ash. His eyes went wide and hollow. He looked like he had been punched in the gut by a ghost. He looked at Maya, really looked at her. He didn't see the assistant anymore. He saw his boss. He saw his owner. Maya took a step forward. She was now the one looming. She leaned in close. I was close enough to hear her whisper. "You didn't just fire me, Julian," she said softly. "You tried to destroy me, and now I own everything you built." Julian swayed. He actually swayed on his feet. He reached out for the table to steady himself. His hand shook so violently that the silverware rattled against the china. Clink, clink, clink. It was the sound of his power evaporating. I stood 5 feet away. I took a sip of my champagne. It tasted like nectar. It tasted like victory. My heart beat a triumphant, heavy rhythm against my ribs. Thump, thump. He was a dead man walking, and he finally knew it. I'm Alina Vance, 34, and I am watching the man who controlled every second of my life realize he has nowhere left to run. The silence in the ballroom was heavy. It was suffocating. Maya held Julian's gaze for one devastating second longer. Then she moved. She didn't speak. She didn't gloat. She simply reached into her sleek leather bag. She pulled out a tablet. It was thin. It was black. It looked like a slate of obsidian in her hand. Julian blinked, sweat dripping into his eye. He didn't understand. He thought the humiliation was over. He thought the reveal of her ownership was the finale. He was wrong. That was just the opening act. Maya tapped the screen. Her fingers moved with the speed of a pianist playing a requiem. She swiped up, 3 fingers, the universal gesture for cast. The massive projection screens behind the stage flickered. They were 60 feet tall. They were meant to display the new company logo. They were meant to display Julian's smiling, triumphant face. Instead, they went black. A low hum vibrated through the floorboards. Then the image resolved. It wasn't a logo, it was a spreadsheet, but it wasn't just any spreadsheet. My breath caught in my throat. I knew that font. I knew those columns. I had spent 6 months copying them onto a flash drive while Julian slept off his whiskey binges. It was his private ledger, the real one. The one that didn't go to the IRS. The one that didn't go to the board of directors. It was magnified to the size of a billboard. Every line was visible. Every illicit transaction was illuminated in high-definition 4K resolution. Shell Corp Alpha $2.5 million wire transfer. Consulting fee Senator Reynolds $50,000. Construction kickback project Gemini $1.2 million. The text was crisp. The numbers were damning. The room went from silent to riotous in the span of a heartbeat. It started with a gasp. A collective intake of breath from 300 people. Then came the murmurs. Is that? Look at the dates. That's the pension fund money. Oh my God, he stole from the retirement accounts. The murmurs grew into a roar. It sounded like a tidal wave crashing against the shore. Accusations flew across the room like shrapnel. Phones came out. Flashes started popping. Flash, flash, flash. They were taking pictures of the screen. They were documenting the crime scene. I looked at Julian. He wasn't swaying anymore. He was frozen. He was a statue made of panic and cheap scotch. His eyes were glued to the screen. He was reading his own obituary written in Excel cells. I saw the exact moment his brain processed what was happening. He realized this wasn't just a firing offense. This wasn't just a lawsuit. This was prison. This was federal. This was the end of his life as a free man. Sweat beaded on his forehead instantly. It ran down his temples in rivulets. His perfectly starched collar was suddenly soaked. He looked like he was melting. He spun around. He looked for the security guards, but the guards were looking at the screen too. They were looking at Arthur Sterling. They weren't going to help him. He looked at Arthur. Arthur was staring at the ledger with a look of cold, hard fury. Julian was alone, totally and completely alone. Panic seized him. He turned his head wildly, his eyes darting around the room, searching for an anchor, searching for a lifeline. His eyes found me. I was standing near the champagne fountain. I was perfectly still. I was the only thing in the room that wasn't moving. His eyes locked onto mine. They were wide. They were pleading. They were the eyes of a child who had broken a vase and needed mommy to fix it. "Alina," he mouthed. I saw his lips move. I saw the desperation etched into every line of his face. He took a step toward me. He reached out his hand. He expected me to run to him. He expected me to create a diversion. He expected me to be the good wife. He expected me to save him, just like I had saved him from his drunk driving incidents, his PR disasters, and his own incompetence for 10 years. My heart hammered against my ribs. Thump, thump, thump. The adrenaline was electric. It coursed through my veins like liquid gold. I looked at his outstretched hand. I looked at his sweating face. I looked at the fear in his eyes, and I felt nothing, no pity, no love, no obligation. I lifted my glass of vintage Dom Perignon to my lips. The crystal was cool against my mouth. I took a slow, deliberate sip. The bubbles danced on my tongue. It was the sweetest thing I had ever tasted. I lowered the glass. I looked him dead in the eye. I didn't smile. I didn't frown. I gave him nothing. And then, with the precision of a guillotine blade dropping, I turned my back on him. I presented my back to him. I shut him out. I heard him gasp. It was a sharp, wounded sound. I stared out at the sea of chaos I had helped create. I watched the FBI agents move in from the periphery. I heard the heavy thud of boots on marble. I took another sip. The show was just getting started. I'm Alina Vance, 34, and I am sitting in a police precinct watching the sunrise, knowing I just dismantled my husband's empire brick by brick. The fluorescent lights overhead hummed with a headache-inducing buzz. ZZZZZZT. It was the only sound in the waiting area. The air smelled of stale, burnt coffee and aggressive industrial floor wax. It was a suffocating, chemical stench that coated the back of my throat. I smoothed the fabric of my dress. It was the same gown I had worn to the gala only hours ago. Now, under these harsh lights, the sequins looked dull. They looked like debris from a crash site. An officer opened a heavy steel door. The hinges groaned. "Mrs. Vance?" he asked, his voice rough with fatigue. "He'll see you now." I stood up. My legs felt surprisingly steady. For 10 years, walking toward Julian felt like walking onto a minefield. I never knew where to step to avoid the explosion. But today the mines were all gone. I walked down the narrow, linoleum-lined hallway. My heels clicked against the floor. Click, click, click. It sounded like a countdown. The officer led me into a small, gray room. It was divided in half by a thick pane of scratched plexiglass. On the other side sat Julian. I almost didn't recognize him. The tuxedo jacket was gone. His white dress shirt was unbuttoned, stained with sweat and God knows what else. His hair, usually gelled into an impenetrable helmet of perfection, was wild. He looked 10 years older than he had yesterday. He looked broken. I sat down on the cold metal stool. The metal bit into my legs through the thin fabric of my dress. I placed a manila envelope on the narrow counter between us. Julian looked up. His eyes were bloodshot. rimmed with red. He looked at me, and for a fleeting second I saw a flash of the old arrogance, the muscle memory of control. "Alina," he croaked, his voice was a wreck. "Get me a lawyer. The ones they provided are idiots. Call Arthur. Tell him this is a misunderstanding." I didn't answer, I just stared at him. I stared at the man who had told me I was worthless. The man who had isolated me from my family. The man who had fired Maya for being too ambitious and then blacklisted her from the industry. "Alina," he snapped, slamming his hand against the glass. The thud vibrated through the table. My heart didn't even skip a beat. My pulse remained slow, steady, cold. "I'm not here to get you a lawyer, Julian," I said softly. My voice sounded strange to my own ears. It sounded like a stranger's voice. It sounded strong. I slid the manila envelope through the narrow slot at the bottom of the window. It made a dry, rasping sound. Julian looked down at it. His trembling fingers opened the flap. He pulled out the documents. He read the header, "Petition for Dissolution of Marriage." He froze. His eyes scanned the page, darting back and forth like a trapped animal. He looked up at me, genuine confusion warring with his rage. "Divorce," he whispered. "Now you're leaving me now?" "I left you 6 months ago, Julian," I said. "I just waited until today to tell you." He shook his head, trying to clear the fog. "But the ledger," he stammered. "The screen, how did Maya get that file? It was encrypted. It was on my private server." He stopped. He looked at me, really looked at me. He saw the lack of surprise on my face. He saw the calm. The realization hit him like a physical blow. His jaw dropped. "You," he breathed. "It was you." He pressed his face against the glass, his breath fogging the surface. "I gave you everything," he hissed. "I gave you a life most women would kill for. I clothed you, I fed you, I made you someone." He was shouting now, spittle flecked the glass. "Why?" he screamed. "Why would you betray me for her?" I stood up. I looked down at him. I felt a profound sense of lightness. It felt like gravity had released its hold on me. "Because you made two fatal mistakes, Julian," I said. I leaned in closer until my nose was inches from the plexiglass. "You fired the wrong woman," I whispered. I paused, letting the words sink into his terrified mind. "And you married the wrong one." I didn't wait for his response. I turned around. "Alina," he screamed behind me. "Alina, you can't leave me here. You're nothing without me, nothing." I walked out the door. The heavy steel slammed shut behind me, clang. It silenced his screams instantly. I walked back down the hallway. I pushed through the heavy double doors of the precinct and stepped outside. The morning air hit me like a splash of ice water. It was crisp, clean. It smelled of rain and pavement and new beginnings. The sun was just beginning to bleed over the horizon. Streaks of violent violet and burning orange painted the sky. It was beautiful. A sleek black car was idling at the curb. The window rolled down. Maya was in the driver's seat. She wasn't wearing her gala gown anymore. She was wearing a sharp blazer and sunglasses. She looked like a CEO. She looked like a shark. She pushed her sunglasses down the bridge of her nose and looked at me. "Done?" she asked. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the first free air I had tasted in a decade. "Done," I said. I opened the passenger door and slid into the leather seat. It was warm. Maya put the car in gear. "Where to?" she asked. I looked at the road stretching out in front of us. It was open. It was endless. "Forward," I said. "Just drive." Maya smiled. She stepped on the gas. The engine purred, a low growl of power. We pulled away from the curb, leaving the precinct, the prison, and Julian in the rearview mirror. I didn't look back. I watched the city wake up around us. I watched the sun climb higher. We had burned his world to the ground. And now, from the ashes, we were going to build our own.